Hello and welcome back to my 10 favorite people. Hope you're doing well. I'm incredibly excited for today's video because Bitcoin just had its most pivotal move since February of this year. And I know that in previous cycles, these are the moments where I would be the most confused and make the most mistakes because I would see very strong arguments from the bearish side on how we had to go lower and how the cycle was likely over. But I would also see very convincing arguments from the bullish side as to why the bottom was likely in. This is a buy the dip opportunity before we have our next major rally higher. So today I want to cover a very simple framework that has completely changed my life. And every time I have ignored it in the past, I have lost a bunch of money, but every single time that I have listened to it in the past, even when it went against my bias and went against my market expectations, I ended up making a bunch of money by just listening to what the charts were telling me. And now, full disclosure, as a lot of you are aware, my base case is this is a mid-cycle reaccumulation phase. I've been saying for weeks now that Bitcoin felt overheated and felt like it needed some prolonged cool down after essentially a straight rally since the bear market bottom at the end of 2022. And we may be overdue for a consolidation like the one we saw in 2020, 2016, and 2012, but we do have to address the elephant in the room that this is a breakdown from a 3-month trading range, which confirms it as a distribution like we saw in 2021 and like we saw with the redistribution in 2022. And I know that's going to anger a lot of you by just me using that word of redistribution. I know it would have angered me in previous cycles where I was fully bought into the hopium and how we had to rally higher in the short term and buy the dip and don't sell your coins to BlackRock. But we have to just accept the facts on the chart that if Bitcoin was bullish here, it should have never lost 60K on a weekly closing basis if we really were going to have that imminent rally higher in the short term. And I know it's very easy to point the finger at the different narratives. Bitcoin is just going down because of the government sell pressure. Bitcoin is just going down because Mt. Gox repayments are around the corner. Bitcoin is only going down because of miner capitulation and the Bitcoin miners are selling. But I've been in this market for 7 years, and every single time Bitcoin has gone down, there has been a narrative, and every time it's gone up, there's been a narrative. I think the narratives just conveniently go along with the price action. If there was enough ETF demand and all the Michael Saylor buying, if that was all enough, it should have absorbed the sell pressure we saw. But the sellers got ahead of the buyers and price ended up breaking down, which makes it incredibly likely that we're going to enter a prolonged reaccumulation pattern here and perhaps even retest as low as the 40,000s. And of course, it's hard to predict exactly how low Bitcoin is going to go. That's why we try to use probabilities to figure that out. But the really nice thing we have here is if we want to talk about short-term bullish arguments, all we need to see is a reclaim of 60K. Until that happens, we have to be a lot more conservative with our expectations, and it's a lot more likely we spend way more time chopping and frustrating both bulls and bears in the short term before the next move higher. And now this can be very hard to do because it's human nature to have a bias, and there have been times in the past where I have completely ignored what the market was telling me, but there have also been times that I've listened to the market even though it went against my bias and it ended up saving me or making me a ton of money. So for example, in 2021, when Bitcoin had this break above 60K with the Coinbase IPO and everybody being massively bullish, I was expecting Bitcoin to go a lot higher. It felt like prices could never go down. But once we broke back into the range, I saw that it was a bearish pattern on the chart, and my gut told me that that should have been a concerning sign, but I ignored it because my bias of expecting higher was more important to me. Same thing here. This was a very clear range breakdown after a 3-month range that we never should have lost if we were really bullish, but I ignored it and we ended up coming down here. After this 3-month accumulation, when Bitcoin broke out over here, this was a very clear bullish breakout, but by then I was so complacent and bored with the market that I didn't add any altcoin risk exposure until the breakout got way more clear over here, and I missed out on a lot of opportunity by not buying lower. And after those 3 painful lessons, I saved myself quite a bit in 2022 by selling Bitcoin when it fell back into this range, even though for those of you that are around at the time, the narrative was Luna is buying, we're going way higher, Luna's buying 10 billion, here we come, this is just one huge reaccumulation pattern and we have to go higher. But as soon as we fell back in that range, I learned the lesson the hard way back there and I sold a bunch of my remaining holdings because if this was actually bullish, we should have never had that false breakout and that close back into the range. And of course, that saved me a ton of pain over the next few months. And for those of you that have been following the channel for a while, you know that I was pretty bearish and not expecting this breakout over here, but I ended up adding exposure because the market told me it was bullish. And if this was really bearish distribution, we should have never had that breakout. And same thing over here. And you can even go back and look at the videos at the time. I was bearish and expecting this to be some kind of distribution that rolled over, like what we saw over here, where we take out the high and then sell off. But as soon as we had this strong green weekly close, a lot of the bears were saying it's a fake out, it's a trap, it's Wyckoff, this and that, don't fall for it. But I just took the chart at face value, saw the close, added a lot of exposure at that level. And even though I was expecting downside, I just listened to the market and rode the rally higher. And actually recently enough for the OGs of the channel, I completely stuck with my bearish bias here and expected the ETFs to be a sell the news event that sent us lower. And I ignored this candle and I could have added a lot of risk here, like all of the cash I've had sitting on the sidelines. And again, you learn from it. I don't regret it that much. I wish I would have added exposure when the market clearly told me there was a ton of ETF demand and we were likely going to rally a lot higher in the short term, but I just ignored it and sat on my existing positions. So I still had exposure to the upside, but the market gave me a clear signal to add exposure and I ignored it. And then of course the rest is history. So here we are today facing that question again. The bears are making their arguments as to why they're right and why it's over and we have to go lower. And the bulls are making their arguments about ETF inflows and, one of the leading presidential candidates is pro crypto. How could we go down? This is the start of the super cycle. And of course, look at what's happening with stock markets and macro is risk on right now. How could you say we're going lower? But we can simplify all of that by just looking at the evidence on the chart. We had a 3-month range. We had a clear break below it. Therefore, we have to be short-term bearish. You guys know I'm long-term bullish because I don't think the cycle is over and I think this is reaccumulation before the next rally higher. But in the short term, don't expect any hopium and moon boy talk because as long as we're below 60, this is a distribution breakdown and we have to accept downside if we're going to put our bias to the side. Now, the good news is that all of the bearish arguments are short-term. We do expect the German government to run out of Bitcoin eventually. They've been selling hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. As of 3 hours ago, they sent another 300 million to sell. So that sell pressure is going to run out eventually. I think they're more than halfway done already. And of course, the Mt. Gox stuff, we have no idea how many of the people getting back their Bitcoin are going to sell, but that of course is going to eventually complete. And we've had this on our minds for years now of this looming supply coming from Mt. Gox. Same thing for the miners. Eventually, all the weak ones are going to go bankrupt and be forced to shut down once they've sold all their Bitcoin, and the strong ones are going to survive and thrive. And this is just something we see each and every cycle. And of course, it aligns very nicely with the summer chop expectation. You can make the argument that summers tend to be weak for Bitcoin anyway. So the fact that we're getting all of this sell pressure out of the way in the summer is great, because maybe by late September, early October, all these supply dynamics will be behind us and we can go back to focusing on our long-term bullish catalysts, like the fact that we have spot ETFs now that keep taking in hundreds of millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin. We're getting more regulatory clarity and we're seeing both sides of the aisle start to support this asset class because it's no longer popular with their constituents to be against it. And of course, I don't think anybody watching this would say they're bearish assets and stocks and crypto in the long term. So yes, there may be some short-term volatility. And of course, we always keep a close eye on macro, but in the long term, we expect currency devaluation to send risk assets higher. And that's why all of this has been part of my main normal cycle thesis. I have no idea if the bottom is 55. I have no idea if the bottom is 50, 45. I want to be prepared for all scenarios. And I do have this failed cycle option in the back of my mind, We're going to have to monitor that to see if that's possible. But right now, nowhere near my base case. And of course, all eyes are just on this range breakdown and whether or not we're going to be able to reclaim it. And of course, the dollar index has been holding support. If it is going to bounce higher here, you can expect more downside on Bitcoin. But for now, we're still waiting for a decision from the dollar index. We know that the recent unemployment rate print of 4.1% is putting quite a bit of pressure on the Fed because this data point has a lot of momentum once it starts moving. And we do have a 2 handle on the front of core CPI. So yes, it's not at their 2% target, but I don't know how much labor market weakness they can justify before being forced to ease a little bit. We're still expecting the first cut in September, but we're going to get a lot of insight in the July meeting on the 31st of this month. So we'll have to wait and see what comes from there because we know the Fed has a huge impact on the dollar index, which has a huge inverse relationship with Bitcoin and its mania phases, and of course alt season as well. As for the S&P 500, if you guessed that it was still going higher, you would be right. I'm starting to get a little bit worried about this rally. It's getting quite a bit steep, but of course, you never know how high these things are going to go. And this divergence between Bitcoin and the S&P 500 just continues to widen. So of course, we're going to continue monitoring that. As for Ethereum, the bullish thing here is at least Ethereum didn't break below its range like Bitcoin did. And you could argue Ethereum is still within its same trading range. If it gets a close here because of grayscale unlocks or something like that, probably a very terrible sign. But if we can hold this low, maybe that could be an indicator that Bitcoin is going to see a reclaim soon. But as of right now, we just have Ethereum bouncing off of the range lows. The mid-level along with that 20-week moving average is really the retest to watch. And of course, the ETFs coming in mid to late July are going to have a huge impact on that. But we're going to have to wait and see. As for Solana, still kind of chopping around. Honestly, doesn't look anywhere near as good as Ethereum. Yes, it is still holding those lows, but we are seeing this descending triangle starting to get built here. Of course, if we end up breaking out of it, it's probably going to be a pretty aggressive breakout. But as of right now, no reason to jump to any conclusions because it is still chopping around in that tight range. And for now, I'm keeping my portfolio pretty conservative. I'm honestly tempted to just shave a little bit off of these positions just because of how bearish of a sign Bitcoin's recent price action was, but give me your feedback on that. And it's definitely something I'm going to consider because obviously I'm still bullish in the long term, but when you have a bearish sign as clean as this one, like the bullish signs I took advantage of last year, it's tempting to maybe sell 10% of my spot holdings and add to that cash position to be ready for opportunity. And if Bitcoin does see that bullish reclaim, maybe that cash that I sold goes into altcoins or something a little bit further out on the risk curve. But for now, I think I'm just going to sit on my hands and think about that a while longer. But as always, we're still chopping around in the fair value range. Now that we had this breakdown, it's probably going to spend quite a bit of time here before our next move higher. And of course, we'll always keep our eyes on our various major support levels. I still think the mid 40,000s is a great place for me to buy, even though I don't know if we get there. If we do, I will take advantage of it. But of course, in the long term, I'm still very bullish on this asset, just like I am on most risk assets, thanks to currency devaluation and money supply expansion. But anyway, let me know what you expect. Is this a failed breakdown that's going to get reclaimed, or is this a real breakdown that's going to take forever for Bitcoin to get back above? You guys know I like letting the market tell us what it's doing instead of us trying to assume with a bias, but I would love to know what you guys expect. Thank you so much for the support on the recent videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.